Jessie Bardwell was a true daddy's girl. The young woman sincerely adored her father Gary, and they shared a special bond. The man also loved his daughter with all his heart. She was the most precious thing in the world to him. Their relationship was characterized by incredible warmth, absolute mutual understanding, and support. The protagonist of this story was an exceptionally pretty, charming, and pleasant girl. During the period in question, she lived in a small resort town called Orange Beach, Alabama, USA. Jessie worked as a waitress in one of the most popular restaurants in the city. But eventually, the girl decided to move to Texas. This decision came as a complete surprise to her father. He saw no good reasons for such a drastic change in his daughter's life. However, Jessie simply explained that she needed to clear her head and change her surroundings. She planned to leave for just a couple of weeks. At first, the girl regularly kept in touch, but gradually, the situation became increasingly alarming. When about 6 months had passed, Jessie stopped giving any news at all. The girl's close friends became worried, but it was her father who had to endure the worst. One night, he woke up drenched in cold sweat. Gary had a terrifying nightmare, after which he was convinced that his daughter was in mortal danger. Jessie's friend named Kimberly knew more about the girl's trip than she had told her father. She was aware that Jessie was going to Texas long before she confessed it to her family. As it turned out, the girl had met a young man there who seemed incredibly attractive to her. The more they communicated, the stronger their feelings for each other grew. Eventually, the heroine of this story dared to go to him. The couple planned to develop their relationship, so Jessie decided to temporarily move in with her boyfriend. But in any case, she intended to return home. The father eagerly awaited his daughter day after day, hoping that his beloved girl would soon walk through the door with her luggage. He desperately wanted her to come back, but Jessie never showed up. The birth of Jessie and her older brother had been a true blessing for their parents. The couple had long dreamed of having children but couldn't conceive. The arrival of a girl and a boy turned their long-held hopes into reality. At that time, the man worked as a firefighter in the Mississippi State Service. A special bond immediately formed between him and his daughter. From a young age, Jessie always singled out her father among all other relatives, worried about him, and constantly called to find out when Daddy would return home from work. They lived as one big, close-knit family: Mom, Dad, Jessie, and her older brother Brandon. But unfortunately, over time, the family began to fall apart. When the girl was in school, a serious conflict arose between her parents. When Jessie turned 14, the couple decided to divorce. The girl chose to stay with her father, as she was very close to him, while her brother went to live with their mother. Some time later, Gary found a new life partner named Gina and married her. This woman became a wonderful stepmother to Jessie. They instantly developed a fondness for each other. The relationships within the family resembled true harmony. After graduating from school, Jessie, who had a strong-willed character, the girl got a job at a coastal restaurant called Cobalt to earn a living. She planned to attend college and get an education, so she began saving money. Jessie dreamed that after obtaining her diploma, she would be able to open her own business in the beauty industry. But all this required substantial investments that the girl could not afford. Nevertheless, she did not give up, inspired by her dream. While working at the restaurant, Jessie befriended Kimberly, the manager of the establishment. The girl told her friend that her father had musical talent. So Gary was invited to play at the restaurant one evening. Gradually, the man began performing there regularly. His beloved daughter worked in the same place, which brought them even closer together. At that point, Jessie had already been dating a guy named Terry for quite some time. They had a calm, serious relationship. But suddenly, the girl felt a new infatuation. One evening, Jason Lowe visited the restaurant, and a spark immediately ignited between him and Jessie. This new acquaintance was very attractive, had 2 university degrees, and grand ambitions. Soon, the young people started dating. For the heroine of this story, Jason became not just an object of infatuation but an example of how one can radically change one's life. The young man worked in a large IT company. As he told her, although he came from a simple family, thanks to his abilities and hard work, he began earning 6-figure sums. Jessie realized that this promising guy could help her fulfill her cherished dream of having her own beauty business. Jessie had long wanted to start her own business, but she lacked the funds. When she shared her plans with Jason, he willingly supported her startup idea. The young man said he would help solve the financial issue, but on one condition: they had to live together in Texas. At first, the girl hesitated, not wanting to leave her beloved father. But in the end, Jessie decided to pursue her dream and embark on a small adventure. Jessie carefully planned the move, keeping her intentions secret from her father. She was afraid to tell him about her long-term plans, understanding that he would be categorically against such a decision. During their last joint Christmas celebration, Gary had no idea that his daughter intended to move in with her new boyfriend. Later, the man admitted that he would have done everything possible to prevent this trip and not let Jessie go. Obviously, the girl realized this, so seeking to avoid her father's resistance, she made up a story about a short-term journey. In May 2016, 27-year-old Jessie found herself in the Texas city of Richardson, a suburb of Dallas. Her boyfriend had the opportunity to work remotely from home, while the girl actively searched for a new job and a place where she could open her own beauty salon. From that time on, Jessie's relationship with her father underwent a dramatic change. They began to drift apart. This was only the first alarming sign in a series of events that turned Gary's worst fears into reality. Within just a few days, it became extremely difficult to contact his daughter. Later, from a friend, the man learned that Jessie had a new boyfriend, for whom she had left for another state. Gary began to dig deeper and found out that this young man completely controlled his daughter's cell phone, listened to all her calls, and read her messages. The only way to communicate with Jessie was through calls directly to her boyfriend, Jason. After each such conversation, the guy promised that the girl would call her father back. And indeed, after some time, she would contact Gary. This was the only way they managed to maintain at least some contact. 2 months of such strained relations passed before Gary finally had the chance to personally meet his daughter's boyfriend. Jessie came to visit her father together with her new chosen one. Moved by the reunion, Gary tried to persuade his daughter not to return to Texas, hugging her tighter than usual. But the girl did not want to listen to anything, believing it necessary to go to Dallas with her beloved to fulfill her dream. Gary had no doubts about the true nature of this young man, but it was impossible to convince his daughter of this. When the lovers were leaving, the man was haunted by an oppressive premonition. He shared his fears with Jessie over the phone, but she only asked her father not to worry. As it turned out, in Texas, everything went completely differently than planned. The guy's real financial status was much more modest than he had previously claimed, so the dreams of opening a beauty salon remained just dreams. Jason earned a decent income, but it was not the millions he had boasted about to the girl, throwing dust in her eyes. His constant lies eventually led to quarrels and conflicts between the lovers. 4 months after moving to Texas, Jessie stopped contacting her father altogether. During this period, Gary called Jason almost every day, persistently demanding to talk to his daughter. However, the young man's response stunned him. Jason claimed that he had no idea where Jessie had disappeared to or what had happened to her. Allegedly, they had a free relationship, and one fine day, the girl simply walked away. Her partner's disappearance supposedly shocked him just as much, and he asked to be notified as soon as Jessie returned home. The guy pretended to be waiting for her, but the father did not believe these words at all. Gary knew well that his daughter had never held such views on relationships, while Jason was actually terribly jealous and constantly monitored the girl's every move. Such guys do not let their chosen ones go just like that. When Jessie did not even call her stepmother or birth mother on Mother's Day to congratulate them on the holiday, it was the last straw for Gary. He knew that his daughter had always been very sensitive about such things. The only reason she could have ignored this important date was serious trouble. The father was convinced that Jessie had gotten into trouble. The very next morning, Gary packed his things, firmly intending to go to Texas in search of his daughter. The man was filled with determination and fury, as he had no doubt that Jason Lowe was directly involved in her disappearance. When the angry father arrived at the house where the lovers lived, he could not find any trace of Jessie's presence. There were no personal belongings of the girl in the dwelling, and Jason continued to insist that he knew nothing and was simply waiting for her return. Then Gary decided to turn to the police. Given all the circumstances of the disappearance, law enforcement reacted immediately. Within a day of receiving the statement, they interrogated Jason several times, trying to find at least some clues, and thoroughly searched the couple's house. However, no traces of Jessie were found. The girls seemed to have vanished into thin air. This clearly contradicted Jason's words that she had just left for a short while and was supposed to return. According to the young man, the last time he saw Jessie was on the morning of May 8, around 10 o'clock. Then she got into her car and drove away, and there had been no news of her since. The police repeatedly spoke with the boyfriend of the missing girl. He claimed that they had a loving but non-committal relationship. Allegedly, Jason did not restrict the girl's freedom and allowed her to live her own life, receiving the same from her. This arrangement suited both of them. At the same time, the guy stated that he was eagerly awaiting the return of his beloved, as her disappearance had been a terrible blow to him. In the house where Jason lived, the police could not find anything suspicious. The young man appeared upset and willingly cooperated with the investigation. According to him, on the day Jessie disappeared, she drove away in her Acura SUV. The story sounded complicated and confusing, but the details about the vehicle raised particular questions. The thing is, the girl had sold her car 3 days before she went missing. Finding this vehicle with the new owner was no trouble for law enforcement. The man unhesitatingly allowed them to inspect the car's interior. However, even there, they could not find anything suspicious or any traces of Jessie. Then the law enforcement officers decided to return to the main suspect's home. The investigators wanted to ask him additional questions, particularly regarding the discrepancies in his statements about the car. On what basis could the young man lie about an already sold vehicle? The detectives visited Jason's house again. During the second search, they quickly understood why the suspect had been dishonest with them. As soon as the investigators crossed the threshold of his room, their attention was immediately drawn to a line of suspicious powder lying on the bedside table. Further examination confirmed that it was indeed an illegal substance. Since the detectives knew that Jason used his own car, they requested to inspect it. As soon as the forensic experts entered the garage, they were immediately hit with the incomparable smell of decomposition. The source of the stench turned out to be the trunk of a black Audi belonging to Jason. The police suspected that there might be a body inside the car, but their fears were not confirmed. It was empty. However, in the car's interior, there was a distinct smell of decay, and stains resembling blood were visible on the upholstery. It was precisely because of the remains of biological material under the influence of heat that this characteristic stench appeared there. Samples of the suspicious traces were immediately sent for examination to the laboratory. To investigate the car, the forensic experts used luminol and ultraviolet lamps. And as soon as they turned on their equipment, the entire trunk seemed to light up with a bright blue glow. In addition, the attention of law enforcement officers was drawn to the damage to the Audi's bumper. It had been torn off and thrown inside the car. It appeared that the young man simply had not had time to repair this detail after some accident. The police officers were convinced that the car crash was directly related to the blood traces found in the trunk. Despite all these findings, Jason continued to insist that he had no idea where his beloved could be. According to the suspect, during an out-of-town trip, he got stuck in the mud, and when he tried to get out, he tore off the bumper. However, the main person of interest in the case could not comment on the presence of drugs in the home and the large amount of blood in the car. Considering the discovered traces, the police instantly reclassified the disappearance case into a murder investigation. Gary had to be informed of the terrible news. Most likely, he would never see his daughter alive again. Judging by the amount of blood found in the suspect's car trunk, the girl was dead. Jason Lowe was taken into custody on charges of possession of illegal substances. The arrest was intended to prevent the young man from escaping while the investigators did not have more substantial evidence of his involvement in Jesse's murder. Of course, to prove Jason's guilt, the main piece of physical evidence was urgently needed: the victim's body. The detectives brought the suspect to the interrogation room and showed him a photo of the girl whom, in his own words, he loved more than anything in the world. However, Jason's reaction was radically different from the feelings he had described before his arrest. The young man looked irritated and indifferent, coldly looking at the image of the missing girl. At the same time, he still insisted that he had no idea about her whereabouts. Countless questions could not break the resistance of the main suspect. However, the Texas State Prosecutor's Office had the opportunity to charge him with intentional murder, even in the absence of a body. Nevertheless, this circumstance significantly complicated the work of forensic experts. They had to prove that the blood traces found in the trunk were sufficient to consider the girl dead. Additional irrefutable evidence of Jason's guilt was needed for this. Finding the victim's body without the killer's confession seemed an almost impossible task. Obviously, the perpetrator could have damaged the car while transporting Jesse's remains to a deserted area. But Texas is a rather large state with numerous rivers, lakes, vast forests, and fields. So the detectives were seriously afraid that the body of the deceased would most likely never be found. Meanwhile, the girl's relatives organized a memorial evening in her honor. All her loved ones gathered on the beach to say goodbye to Jessie, having lost any hope of ever seeing her alive. They begged God for only one thing: that she would finally be found, and the perpetrator of the tragedy would end up behind bars. On May 19, almost 3 weeks after Jessie was last seen alive, an unexpected breakthrough occurred in the investigation. Thanks to informants' testimonies, the police had strong reasons to believe that the girl's remains were hidden on a remote ranch in the north of the state. The victim's relatives were never told who exactly provided this information, but law enforcement officers assured that the source was reliable. In the evening, a police squad arrived at the specified ranch located in a farming town. The cops immediately began combing the surrounding fields, primarily looking for traces of a car that could have gotten stuck there. Soon, they managed to come across a deep rut from wheels, which led to a pile of garbage mixed with mud. It seemed that this place served someone as an improvised tombstone. Approaching closer, the police officers caught an unbearable stench of decay, so they decided to dig up the suspicious mound. A gruesome sight opened up before them. Inside the pit lay a woman's body, carelessly wrapped in a blue sheet. Obviously, someone had tried to hide the grave under the garbage, but instead only drew extra attention to it. The hastily dug pit at the edge of the field indicated that the perpetrator had acted in a hurry, trying to get away as quickly as possible. It was undoubtedly an amateur's work. The killer had thrown out the body along with blood-stained towels and a blanket, physical evidence that unequivocally pointed to a massacre. The condition of the remains was extremely deplorable. Having spent a week in a stinking pile of junk under the scorching sun, they had undergone significant putrefactive changes. The forensic expert needed a week of painstaking work to officially confirm the identity of the deceased. This was possible only thanks to dental records. It was her, the missing Jessie Bardwell, who was found in that hastily dug grave, which fully confirmed the suspicions of the investigation. Forensic experts officially classified the girl's death as violent, but it was impossible to establish its immediate cause due to the too strong post-mortem changes in the body. About 1,000 people attended the farewell ceremony for the beautiful young Jessie. Of course, not all of them belonged to the circle of her relatives or friends, but this high-profile case stirred the public. Numerous townspeople, sincerely sympathizing with the grief that befell the loving father, came to personally express their support to him. The next 12 months of Gary's life were spent in mourning for his lost daughter. Meanwhile, the main suspect in her murder was behind bars awaiting trial. Jason Lowe was placed in custody in McKinney County, Texas, officially charged with intentional murder. Jason had enough money to hire a lawyer with vast experience, over 42 years of successful practice in criminal cases. The defender immediately took the course of complete acquittal of his client, insisting that in the absence of a criminal record, the young man could not a priori be found guilty of such a serious crime. Although from the very beginning it was obvious that Jason was far from a model of virtue, his human rights activist stubbornly tried to portray his ward as a completely decent member of society. In parallel with this, the victim's father was experiencing the bitterness of loss in his own way. The man sought just punishment for the killer, but events were developing too slowly for his liking. In one moment of anger, Gary even printed out a photo of Jason, put it on a stump near the house, and hit it several times with all his might with a sledgehammer. He admitted that he would readily repeat the same with the real criminal if he managed to escape imprisonment. And although grief fatally wounded the man, Gary did not give up. He wanted only one thing, that the scoundrel who had taken the life of his only daughter would stand trial and pay for what he had done in full. In August 2017, detectives visited Jason Lowe at his place of detention. The investigators aimed to record a video conversation with the accused, but he refused to communicate. The young man stated that he was going to keep his version of events until the moment he appeared before the jury. He fervently believed that the prepared story would be the key to his complete acquittal. Thus, the representatives of the state prosecution never received any information about what line of defense they would have to confront in court. In such circumstances, it was imperative to use any opportunity to hone the tactics of conducting the process, because the prosecutor's office did not even have accurate data on the immediate cause of the girl's death. The huge gaps in the evidence base gave the defendant a real chance to get off scot-free. To properly prepare the prosecution for future battles, a mock trial was organized. This revealed numerous weaknesses in the prosecutor's position. The simulated sessions carefully considered various defense scenarios that the defendant might choose, and approaches to effectively counter them. According to the conviction of the state prosecutors, Jessie did not suspect the dark side of her chosen one's nature until the very end. On the other hand, her father Gary had no doubt that nothing good awaited his daughter in such a relationship. The man described in detail everything that had happened between the lovers over several months. This picture fully corresponded to the behavior of a stubborn manipulator who seeks to tightly control his partner. Although Gary had no direct evidence that Jason had ever raised his hand against Jessie, the sharp deterioration in their communication could not but alert the father. To strengthen its position in court, the prosecution involved two new witnesses, the girl's friends, whom she had met after moving to Texas. The young married couple who rented housing next door seemed quiet and a little shy at first glance. However, these people were the last to see Jessie alive and communicate with her face-to-face without the presence of her boyfriend immediately before the disappearance. According to the witnesses, they sincerely believed the young couple, considering their feelings mutual and deep. The neighbors were just about to leave town for a few days and went on a planned trip on May 1st. Before leaving, they turned to Jessie with a request to look after their dog until they returned. Having come back home, the young couple did not notice anything suspicious. True, they never saw Jessie herself. Jason returned the keys and the dog to the neighbors, explaining the girl's absence by the fact that she had gone somewhere on her own business. He did not say a word about her disappearance or any problems between them, behaving as if nothing had happened. However, the couple found it oddly strange that Jesse no longer appeared in public. And just a few days later, rumors reached them about the threat of Jason's arrest on suspicion of murdering his missing beloved. At that time, the neighbors were still convinced of the young man's innocence. Law enforcement officers suggested that the witnesses visit their friend in prison and try to get him to talk. The cops advised them to discreetly record the conversation, hoping that communication with acquaintances would help obtain important information for the investigation from the suspect. The detectives did not even suspect that this plan would not only work but also allow them to obtain one of the most significant pieces of evidence of Jason's guilt. During a frank conversation, the guy confessed to his friend that he was indeed next to Jessie at the time of her death but called everything that happened a terrible accident. Such wording was automatically regarded as an admission of guilt, albeit of a lesser severity than cold-blooded murder with intent. However, even this was already an indisputable confirmation of Jason's previous lies. One way or another, the investigation had a powerful piece of evidence that was impossible to avoid. The defendant's defenders immediately tried to prohibit the use of this testimony in court, challenging its admissibility. However, the lawyers failed to achieve this. And so, the long-awaited day of the start of the trial finally came. By that time, Gary had already moved to Texas, where he intended to personally fight for the just punishment of the scoundrel who had ruthlessly cut short the life of his beloved daughter. The prosecutor's office was convinced that Jason was a troubled young man with a long history of substance abuse. And although he formally had no criminal record, people from his entourage did not always speak favorably of him. The defendant had practically no close friends, and many acquaintances openly shunned his company. Jason could not control himself and fell into an unrestrained rage under the influence of drugs. According to the investigation, it was in one of the attacks of uncontrolled fury under the influence of drugs that Jason attacked Jessie with fatal consequences. After all, the young man had a pronounced tendency to manipulative actions and sought to control literally every step of his girlfriend. It is likely that Jessie finally realized her fatal mistake and wanted to break off this painful relationship in order to return under the protection of her father. Unfortunately, the attempt to break free from the toxic bonds cost her her life. As evidence of this version, the police found two of Jason's ex-girlfriends. Both confirmed long-standing fears about him. Due to his manipulative inclinations, the man tried every time to tear the girls away from their families. He took his chosen ones to the most remote places and strictly forbade any communication with loved ones there. In relationships, Jason was distinguished by pathological jealousy, which made him lose his temper over any little thing. The situation was especially aggravated by the complete lack of trust on his part. The young man could put forward completely unfounded accusations of infidelity and then pounce with his fists, as if trying to punish his partner in such a perverted way. Both ex-girlfriends did not hide that they had repeatedly become victims of brutal domestic violence, because of which they eventually dared to escape from their tormentor. Fortunately, they managed to break off the relationship precisely because of the beatings, avoiding a much more tragic fate that befell Jessie. Every time the chosen one dared to leave him, Jason fell into an unrestrained rage. And only by a miracle did the two previous girls manage to get out alive. According to the version of the state prosecution, Jason killed Jessie between May 1st and 3rd, most likely on the same day when the neighbors last saw the girl alive. After the massacre, the body lay in the trunk of the car for several more days, until the criminal decided to get rid of the horrifying burden by throwing the bloodied remains at a deserted ranch. Evidence of Jason's involvement in the murder was provided by other biological traces in the car's interior, as well as towels and a blanket found along with the deceased. The most eloquent confirmation of the defendant's guilt was the same blue sheet in which Jessie's mutilated body was wrapped. It was part of a set of bedding, the rest of which was later found in Jason's home. The killer's cynicism knew no bounds, because he continued to sleep on these things even after the deed, as if nothing had happened. On the other hand, the defendant's lawyers resorted to any means to whitewash his image and convince the jury of their client's complete innocence. During his speech in the courtroom, Jason admitted that at the age of 13, he had become addicted to illegal substances, although this happened completely against his will. Allegedly, friends forced the teenager to try drugs, putting him on the needle. At the same time, the accused emphasized that despite the destructive addiction, he managed to remain a purposeful and ambitious guy. He got a job at an advanced technology company, had a decent income, and tried to acquire new knowledge in order to achieve a better life. In front of the jury, the man openly stated his sincere intentions to create a strong family with Jessie and buy a joint home for them. And he explained the tragedy that occurred as a banal coincidence. Only during the court session did Jason finally present his own version of events, which stunned everyone present. According to him, on that fatal evening, the lovers took pills together designed to enhance libido and the brightness of sexual sensations. After that, the young couple decided to make love right in the shower. It was during these passionate caresses that the girl slipped and hit her head hard on the side of the bathtub. Jessie barely managed to sit up, firmly clutching her head with her hands. She kept repeating that she felt unwell. The guy helped her get out of the dangerous place and was going to call an ambulance, but the girl stopped him. Allegedly, she just needed to get a good night's sleep, and everything would pass. The lovers did just that, they went to bed, but in the morning, Jason found his beloved lifeless. By personal admission, this loss literally broke his heart. The young man fell into a state of shock and despair. He desperately tried to bring the girl to her senses, even slapping her in the vain hope of a miracle. But Jessie was already dead. Jason was terribly afraid to call the police, as he had no doubt that he would immediately be accused of intentional murder. Therefore, he decided to simply get rid of the body, but he had no idea how to do it correctly. By a coincidence favorable for the accused, on the same day, a supplier of illegal drugs visited him. Jason told him about the terrible incident that had occurred, and the dealer agreed to help hide the traces of the crime. Together they packed Jessie's lifeless body in a blue sheet, after which they hid the horrifying cargo in the trunk of the guy's Audi. Only later did Jason take out and bury the remains of his beloved at a deserted ranch. However, the investigation failed to find any evidence of the participation of a third party in this burial. The defendant's confession dealt a tangible blow to the position of the state prosecution. However, the subsequent facts from Jason's life did not at all indicate the mental suffering of a person who had lost the most precious person in the world. While Jessie's body was slowly decomposing in the trunk of the car, her killer was already actively making new acquaintances, vividly communicating with other girls, making dates with them, and even turning flirting into intimate relationships. While examining the suspect's mobile phone, investigators came across substantial confirmations of his dubious grief. It turned out that shortly after the disappearance of one girl, Jason managed to communicate dissolutely and exchange candid photos with several new passions at once. As the prosecution insisted, with loud slaps, the inhuman man tried to mask the traces of a brutal beating that led to a fatal craniocerebral injury. It was the one that was later stated by forensic experts during the autopsy of Jessie's mutilated body. After all, even from the suspect's own words, one thing was obvious: such blows could not at all serve as a way to bring the girl back to consciousness after an accident. The prosecutor irrefutably proved that the injuries were the result of intentional beatings, so Jason's entire story from beginning to end was a complete fabrication. After interrogating the accused, another stunning piece of information came to light. It turned out that the mysterious informant who led the investigation to the place where the victim's body was hidden was none other than the killer himself. The defense immediately tried to turn this fact in favor of their client, trying to mitigate Jason's guilt before the law. However, in reality, his actions had nothing to do with sincere repentance or sympathy for the relatives of the deceased. The killer pursued a clear goal, to avoid the most severe punishment that threatened him at any cost. It was for this reason that the young man eventually agreed to a deal with the prosecution. In exchange for admitting his guilt, he expected to receive only half of the maximum possible term of imprisonment, that is, 50 years instead of 99. In the end, the sentence for Jason Lowe fully corresponded to the agreements reached, 50 years behind bars. The defendant will receive the right to parole no earlier than 2051. After the verdict was delivered, the convict was repeatedly visited by media representatives who hoped to shed light on the white spots in this high-profile case. However, Jason never resorted to frankness, not revealing any new details. He still stubbornly insisted that Jesse's death was a tragic accident that had nothing to do with his criminal actions. That's all for now. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any future content. Take care and goodbye.